In 1592 and again in 1597, Japan invaded Korea with the intent to conquer the Korean peninsula and eventually Ming China. A year later, the conflict would end with Japanese forces withdrawing from the Korean peninsula after a military stalemate. On August 22, 1910, Japan effectively annexed Korea with the signing of the Japanese-Korea Treaty. Japanese rule over Korea lasted until the end of the Second World War, at which time Japan was forced to relinquish their authority over the peninsula. Now, at the end of World War II, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel into two occupation zones: the North, which came under the influence of the Soviet Union, and the South, which was supported by the United States. This division led to the establishment of separate governments in the North and South, with the North being installed as a communist state and the South as a republic. The tensions between the two sides escalated, and on June 25, 1950, North Korean forces backed by China and the Soviet Union invaded South Korea. This marked the beginning of the Korean War. The invasion of the South by the North was met with worldwide condemnation. The United Nations, which was founded just 5 years prior, met and denounced the invasion. They authorized the formation of the United Nations Command and the deployment of forces to Korea to repel the invasion. 21 countries contributed to the UN forces, with the United States supplying approximately 90% of the military personnel. This marked the first time that a collective security force under the direction of the United Nations was utilized. In June 1950, President Harry Truman ordered a naval blockade of Woosan Harbor on North Korea's east coast. It was the largest naval blockade in history. It led to the capture of Pyongyang in October by the 1st Marine Division, along with other UN forces. September of 1950, after 2 months of fighting, the South Korean army, along with the American forces who had been hastily deployed to the region, were on the brink of defeat. A daring counteroffensive was led by General Douglas MacArthur, who launched an amphibious landing in Incheon, a port on South Korea's western coast, held by North Korea. This operation, codenamed Operation Chromite, was a turning point in the war, allowing American forces to overwhelm the North Koreans and secure the city, leading to the retaking of Seoul. And probably the most famous engagement of the war was the Battle of Chosun Reservoir. The battle was a result of the U.S. 8th Army's advance in northwest Korea and the 10th Corps' advance along the east side of the Korean peninsula to sever enemy supply lines near the Chosun Reservoir. The U.S. 1st Marine Division, commanded by Major General Oliver P. Smith, advanced up the west side of the reservoir, while elements of the U.S. Army's 7th Infantry Division, led by Regimental Combat Team 31, advanced on the east side. The RTC-31 was surrounded by a far superior Chinese force, isolating UN forces at Hagaru-ri on both sides of the reservoir. This led to the 10th Corps beginning a retreat from the Chosun Reservoir on November 30th, 1950. The 5th and 7th Marines were sent to rescue the surrounded combat team. They formed up into a single column and engaged the Chinese army, who were surrounding the combat team. The battle was fought on some of the most difficult terrain in all of Korea. And to make it worse, as if being shot at could get any worse, the battle took place during the winter, where temperatures plummeted to negative 35 degrees Fahrenheit. As one Marine put it, if you stopped moving, you froze. The terrain and weather made the fighting more brutal than anybody could ever have imagined. But the determination and tenacity of the Marines during the battle prevented the Chinese from overrunning the UN troops south of the Chosun Reservoir. Thousands of American troops were dead or missing, and thousands more were wounded. It is believed that as many as 50,000 Chinese soldiers were killed. The 1st Marines would receive the Presidential Unit Citation, and 14 Marines, 2 soldiers, and 1 Navy pilot received the Medal of Honor. Those who served during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir would become known as the Chosen Few, or the Frozen Chosen. When the war began, the United States was using much of the same equipment it had used during World War II. This included aircraft such as the B-29 and the P-51 Mustang, both prop-driven. But the North Koreans had a new aircraft, the Soviet MiG-15 jet fighter. The Americans needed to respond in kind, and they did with the introduction of the F-86 Saberjet. With the new F-86 taking on the MiG-15, it marked the first time jet aircraft engaged in battle. It also was the first war to be fought by the Air Force, which became independent of the Army in 1947. By the end of the war, the F-86 would be credited with shooting down 792 MiGs while only losing 76. That's a kill ratio of 10-1. The fighting ended on July 27, 1953, with the signing of an armistice agreement, which left the country divided along the newly established demilitarized zone, also known as the DMZ. In total, an estimated 5 million military members and civilians lost their lives. And because no formal peace treaty was ever signed, the unfinished war continues to divide Korea to this day. A constant presence of troops, mostly American, remain in South Korea along the DMZ as a deterrent to any further military action by the North. The Korean War was the first major battle of the Cold War, which pitted the former Allies and emerging superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, against each other in a geopolitical, ideological, and military standoff that lasted until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Over the course of almost 50 years, there were many fascinating and even crazy, but mostly unknown things that went on. And to find out 20 facts that you probably never knew about the Cold War, click the screen now. And if you like this video, please smash that like button and leave us a comment. Until next time, I'm Dennis Gill for Revealing History.